He's using the palace that Herod previously built as his headquarters, as his palace here. That makes sense because, again, we see these two places. One is the Jewish stronghold for the city, the temple, and the other is the Roman stronghold for the city, which is the palace complex that Herod the Great built. Now, what is Josephus? I'll read you a Josephus quote. "Adjoining these towers was the king's palace, which surpasses all description. A wall 30 cubits high completely enclosed it." Okay, now this is important. Okay, I'm going to show you this top plan. Okay, do you see the palace there? It's got this wall all the way around it. This makes sense because if you're Herod the Great and the city rebels against you, you're going to want a fortification around where you live, right? And you're going to keep the soldiers inside that fortification or outside that fortification? Inside. Okay. So we know from Josephus, who describes the palace in detail, that the palace building itself was back there. There's actually two of them side by side. Then there was a garden, a royal garden, as palaces back then had, that came out this way. And then the barracks, where the soldiers were, right through here. And that whole fortified area was the palace complex. Okay? Now, we know that there's one gate leading outside of the palace complex. You know how we know that? We know that from archaeology. Because, and listen to this, this is bizarre, they excavated this entire side of the old city here. Now if you look at the arrow slot up here, okay, back in the 1970s, my professor was a teenager at that point, but he was already on staff with this dig, and he used to put his lunch when they were digging in that arrow slot up there. So if you go just below the arrow slot, you'll see where the stones get whiter, brighter. You see that? Yeah. That's the dirt level that was coming across here.
Wow.
So, and they dug all the way from Jaffa Gate all the way to where it corners over here. They removed all of this dirt. There's a little patch of dirt that they didn't remove because there was a tree there at the time. So they dug around it so you can see some of the dirt as it would have been before it was excavated. Now, so we know that out of this fortified palace complex, there is only one gate where you can exit out of the city from that complex. Because they didn't know, maybe they'd find two gates, but they only found one gate. Okay? That's important because of this scripture. Out of Luke 23:26, it says this: "As the soldiers led Jesus away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country, and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus." Okay? So, where this trial took place, and we'll read about it and we'll see what this was, but this is the place that Jesus was tried. This is the only place for Herod the Great's palace complex where you can come in from the open country. You understand what I'm saying? Okay, now let's talk about what was found here and then we'll read the story. So you want to follow me through the gate complex. This is the part of the gate right here on either side. And then here are some of the original steps that I'm walking up right here. And as you come up through the gate where I am here, I want you to look at this wall It's right here that connected to the side of the gate, because again, this is all fortified in through this gate area. Here's the only drawing that is a drawing that my professor put together. But he was not allowed to say, in the signage shows you a sign that this was a gate and everything, but he wasn't allowed to say what happened here, because it's a very, very sensitive issue in this country, as you can imagine. Okay, so here's one problem with archaeology, is it is itself destructive. So when you find something, you often remove it in order to keep going down. And that's what happened here. So you see in the reconstruction right here and right here, up there and down here, that this was stone pavement in this gate. When you find a stone pavement, when you find a floor archaeologically, you rip it up and you look underneath, because any coins and things that you find underneath the floor is going to be what dates the floor. So they removed it, but there's a few of these stone pavements that are still in situ, in place, right here. See them? So these came out, and this whole area was paved with those paving stones, and then there's stairs that go up to the top there, and then there's a bunch more paving stones that they removed up top here. You can see these steps of the gate where they went in into the palace complex at the time of Herod the Great. See this little patch of wall right here that looks different. Its masonry looks different from the rest of the wall. That's a preserved piece of wall from the time of Herod the Great. Okay, so this is that gate going in and out of the palace complex. It was also covered with stone pavement. You can kind of see some remnant of that. And then there was this that was found archaeologically. Okay, now, does anybody know what this is?
Stage.
Think of Tel Dan. It's called Bima, or Bama in Hebrew. Remember the place in the gate at Tel Dan where the king sat? Do you remember those things to provide shade? There's one of them that was found right here. See it? That was moved.
Where Pastor Kenny was sitting, remember? At the Tel Dan gate.
Yeah. So that was found over here, but they moved it over there just to better protect it. But this is a bima. This is a judgment seat. Okay? So we have a gate coming out of Herod the Great's palace with stone pavement and a judgment seat. Now, what is the purpose of this? Well, if the purpose is for people like Pontius Pilate, who is going to talk to the people, address the people outside of the Roman stronghold, outside of the temple, or outside of the palace, sorry. Then he would come and address the crowd, which would be standing out there. Understand?
Is there a gate behind that right there?
The gate is down there,
Okay.
where those stairs are preserved in the bedrock. And so they'd come out, Pontius Pilate would come out there, and then he would have climbed these stairs, and then he would have addressed from the judgment seat. Okay, now, so before I read the story, let me make sure that you all understand. Palace complex, barracks, garden, actual palace building, the gate, the only gate that goes outside of the palace complex to the outside of the city, judgment seat, stone pavement. Now all we got to do is read the account. I'm going to read starting in chapter 18, verse 28. It says, "Then the Jews led Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. Okay, so this says that they would go to the palace of the Roman governor. Remember, I read Philo, who says the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, used as his palace the one that Herod the Great had built. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, the Jews did not enter the palace. In other words, they couldn't go anywhere in that complex and not become unclean, right? There was, Josephus describes the statues and the statuettes of the gods and the goddesses all through that Roman garden. And so that they wouldn't become unclean, the Jews stayed outside of the city, outside of the palace complex. They wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" And so that whole part of the conversation happens here. They say, "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law. But we have no right to execute anyone," the Jews objected. This happened so that the words Jesus had spoken, indicating the kind of death he was going to die, would be fulfilled. Pilate then went back inside the palace, so he goes back through that gate, summoned Jesus and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked, "or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "It was your people and your chief priests who handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jews. But now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You are right in saying I am a king. In fact, for this reason I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." "What is truth?" Pilate asked. With this, he went out again to the Jews and said, "I find no basis for a charge against him." Then they talk about releasing the prisoner and that whole discussion. I'm going to skip down to chapter 19. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him in the face. Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out, think of this, right out that gate. When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify! Crucify!" But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." The Jews insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law, he must die, because he claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jews kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement, which in Aramaic is Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of Passover week, about the 6th hour. "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but Caesar," the chief priests answered. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. So what I'd like to do now, this is where Jesus was handed over to be crucified. Now we're going to walk from here to the place where he was crucified. How exactly they went, did they stay outside of the city? The place where he was handed over was outside the city. The place where he was crucified is outside the city. So probably they just went there outside of the city, but they may have passed through another gate to try to get a bigger crowd together, who knows. But just keep in mind as we make this walk to our next destination that this is the distance that Simon of Cyrene had to take the cross, and this is after being flogged so severely. This is how far Jesus had to go to get to the actual place of crucifixion.